Congressman Grayson, I look at this like we're a man who's certain to have a heart attack 5 years from now who refuses to acknowledge that fact or do anything to change his or her behavior in advance of that heart attack. It's as if changing your diet to not eat sugar, to getting the transparency at the Federal Reserve, posting collateral in the derivatives market, and ending too big to fail, which would reveal the fraud that is the massive banking system that is supported at the Federal Reserve, instead of our politicians addressing that fraud now so that we can avoid the apocalyptic version of events, which is the utter collapse of all paper assets in this country as a result of the money printing, which is the future alternative. What can we do to make people understand the future alternative so that making the modest dietary changes, if you will, and stop eating sugar and actually make the change we need actually happens, Congressman Grayson?
I think what you said is true, but I actually think it's far worse than that. What we're seeing is, under the guise of monetary policy, a vast transfer of wealth from the taxpayers to private interests. And that is accomplished through guarantees by the Federal Reserve that are undisclosed, through loans that are undisclosed, through massive multi-billion-dollar transactions that there's no accountability for. Take the $500 billion in foreign currency swaps that I just described. One man says he wants to do it. 10 others say it's okay with them, and over $1,000 for every man, woman, and child in this country is transferred overseas. And I asked the chairman who got that money, and he said, I don't know. That was his answer. I don't know who got the money. What we're going to see is that as the Federal Reserve asserts itself and hands out more and more money to its friends through guarantees, through loans, and otherwise, every dollar in your pocket becomes less valuable. Everyone's 401k, everyone's checking account, everyone's investments, they all become trash. And that's the result of this policy the Federal Reserve has been adopting to help its friends in the names of saving the system, when in fact we need to reform the system so it doesn't need to be saved. We need to end the possibility of too big to fail. We need to end the possibility of bailouts, and that's the direction we need to go to survive as a country, to survive as a civilization.
Speaking of auditing the Fed, and then I'll wrap this up, but I'd love to get your reaction before I go, Congressman Paul, on some of the disclosures from March of 2004, because right now, if we want to audit the Fed, we have to wait 6 years, and then we get released emails, partially released emails that we get to read to politicians 6 years after the fact, which is where we find ourselves relative to 2004. Bear in mind, of course, as we all know, the housing bubble began really its explosion between 04, 05, 06, 07. This from Alan Greenspan, chairman of the Federal Reserve, March of 2004, and I quote, "We run the risk," said Chairman Greenspan, "by laying out the pros and cons of a particular argument, of inducing people to join in on the debate, and in this regard, it is possible to lose control of a process that only we fully understand." He's referring specifically there to the housing finance and the financing of housing. Also in the room, Jack Gunn, former Federal Reserve Bank president, member of the Fed, effectively a contemporary of the Fed chairman. And I quote him, he's talking about South Florida real estate at the exact same time that the Fed chairman is saying, make sure nobody hears about this because only we understand. And clearly, based on the $23 trillion that we've given them and all the money that the banks continue to take out of the system, they clearly do understand. Fed Governor Gunn, buyers freely admitting that they have no intention of occupying the units or building on the land, but rather are counting on flipping the properties, selling them quickly at a higher price. Is this compelling evidence for the case to audit the Fed, that we are seeing this sort of email and this sort of dissent being hidden from the American people?
Absolutely. That makes our point and why it's necessary for us to know what they're doing and thinking. You know, in spite of all the secrecy, there were some economists, even back in the early part of this decade, that saw it coming, knew it was coming, saw the bubble, predicted it, and acted accordingly. But, you know, what bothers me now is those economists who knew it was coming and predicted the crash, they're not asked anything. I mean, they're not being interviewed by the commission to figure out how this bubble occurred and what happened. So I think we're locked in on this course. And one of the other reasons why I think nothing ever changes is even though they want to, the real problem is it's like an addiction. It's like taking a person off drugs. And you do have withdrawal symptoms. For us to argue the case, they shouldn't do this and they shouldn't do that, when you have the bubble, to walk away and let the bubble do what it's supposed to do, that is correct itself, There is some pain, but it's shorter lived than it is when you prop it up, add more regulations and more control and more inflation, more spending. We just compound it. But the withdrawal symptoms are such that the politician never votes to have withdrawal symptoms. Politically, he's much safer by saying, let's vote for the bailout, because they only think about a day or two ahead and maybe to the next election at the most. But that's another one of the reasons why we have such trouble in bringing about decent changes.
I got to wrap this, Congressman Paul, but do you think it's a decent evaluation of a politician to see how they vote on the Too Big to Fail amendment, how they vote on audit the Fed, and how they vote on derivative transparency? Is that a decent way for the average American to judge their district?
It's not going to go by without the people knowing. With the internet and the grassroots movements that's going on right now, everybody's going to know what they do, and I think it's great.
Dylan?
Yeah, go ahead, Congressman.
Dylan, it's very simple. If you vote for these amendments, you're for the people. If you vote against them, you're for the banks. People will remember.
All right, listen, I can't thank both of you enough for the conversation today. Hopefully we'll do more of it. Congressman Grayson, Congressman Paul, thank you, gentlemen.